Hello everyone, nice to have you joining us. We will just give people another couple of minutes to come in. If you'd like to start sharing introductions of yourselves in the chat, that would be great. Just give people another minute or so. Thank you to those of you who have joined on time, but we do know there are a few more people coming in, so we'll just give them another minute or so. Okay, I think we have given latecomers sufficient opportunity to join us. Unless, Megan, are there any more in the waiting room still to come in?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay, let's begin then. I'd like to go on to the next slide. So, welcome here, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending where you are. My name is Liza Reilly. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Interagency Security Forum, GISF, and the lead for this area of common concern in the HNPW programme. This is the first session for the stream on integrating security risk management across humanitarian action in this year's HNPW. And we've got a number of events coming up over the next 3 weeks. Our overall aim for these 3 weeks is to facilitate discussions, both to raise awareness about the topic of security risk management, but also, and to me most importantly, to gather thoughts and inputs to ensure we can continue to improve the responsiveness of security risk management in order to meet the needs of the humanitarian sector as the context we work in, the global context, continues to change so much. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy this session and the rest of HNPW. Next slide. So today's session will look at physical and mental well-being and why both are an integral part of security risk management. I think most people will easily accept that physical safety is central for security risk management, but may be less clear why we also consider mental safety. Mental well-being is key when looking at security risk management for a number of reasons. Firstly, if we consider Maslow's hierarchy of needs, safety is a basic need. Therefore, for somebody to function effectively and feel mentally safe, they must also feel physically safe. Secondly, people who are stressed will often make bad decisions. This can have a direct impact on their safety and security, as well as on the security of those around them. And last but not least, if the people responsible for the safety and security of others, whether as managers or as the security staff, if they're not mentally fit when they have to respond to incidents or crises, their capacity to do so effectively is reduced. So over the next 90 minutes, we will look at these issues in more detail and hopefully establish that link between physical and mental safety and why it is key for effective security risk management. Next. As with all events, as you're sure you're now used to after a couple of years of Zoom meetings, there are some housekeeping rules. This event will last for 90 minutes. If you haven't yet done so, do please introduce yourself in the chat, addressing your message to everyone so we know who's here. The event is being recorded. This is for note-taking purposes, and a summary version will be shared with HNPW for them to share on their website. If you say anything that you would wish not to be shared, do please let us know and we can edit that out. It is expected to be an interactive event, so do please take part, but do stay muted unless we ask you to do otherwise. If you could turn your camera on, that's great. Makes us feel that we're talking to somebody and not to an empty room. If you have any technical questions, reach out to GISF production in the chat. And there will be a panel session with Q&A. So if you have any questions as we go along, do please add them into the chat and we will pick them up at the end. We will also be using Mentimeter during this session. If you don't already have it, you can download the app on your phone or tablet or go to menti.com and we'll share the code for the questions as we come to them. So the objectives of today's session is to better understand the role of security risk management to ensure mental as well as physical well-being. So what are we doing as security managers? How do we fulfill that role to ensure mental as well as physical well-being? But also what we're looking at it is from the other perspective as well, to make sure that what we are doing around well-being is able to be integrated within program delivery and isn't sitting as a silo on its own. Next, joining me today, we have three experts who are going to discuss various issues around this. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Steve Dennis. He has been a field-based aid worker for the last 2 decades. He struggled to recover following a critical incident that I'm sure many of you are aware of. And he now runs his own consulting group working with aid organisations to improve their policy and practices and to close gaps in staff support. Also with us, we have Liza Jachens. Liza is a psychology research associate and lecturer at Webster University in Geneva. She has extensive occupational health experience designing and implementing psychosocial risk assessments and health interventions. And as a research consultant has undertaken a number of projects specifically for humanitarian organisations. And we are also joined by Philipp Bertslav. Philipp is the Global Health and Safety Security Advisor at CBM. He has over 10 years experience in providing security-related support services to enable program delivery in challenging environments. In particular, Philipp is passionate about driving forward a disability-inclusive security risk management approach. So I welcome those three. And I'd just like to finally say a word about myself and my interest in this topic. Following my last field-based mission 10 years ago now, I was encouraged by my organisation to attend a psychosocial debrief, which I did, despite assuming at the time that I was fine, if only a bit exhausted. After 90 minutes of the planned 45-minute session, we all agreed I was suffering from trauma. And not only have I now been in therapy on and off for the last 10 years, I have trained to be a psychotherapist to help others in a similar position. So for me, this whole interlacing between the physical and mental well-being is very important. On today's agenda, we will have a look at a case study, and we'll then do some self-reflection. So considering the incident in the case study, how might that affect me? How might that affect the organisation I work for? And we'll round off the session with a panel discussion. So before handing over to Philipp to do the case study, we would like you to complete a Mentimeter poll. You can see the code there that you should enter. So say you can either use the Mentimeter app or go to menti.com. And the question is, what is most important for physical and mental well-being in security risk management? And if you can just answer that in 1 or 2 words, that would be great. And we'll show you the results of that later in the programme. So on that note, I would like to hand over to Philipp.
Thank you, Lisa. And hi, everyone. To show why mental and physical well-being is of concern to staff, I'd like to begin by introducing you to the country office team of Georgia. So very recently, this team here, you can see, they experienced an armed robbery in their office in the late afternoon. 3 armed men, they entered the office. Next slide, please. So during this incident, 3 armed men entered the office. And Ariana, the finance manager, she's threatened at gunpoint to open the safe, which contains a large amount of cash. Namazi, the country director, she's currently at a meeting with the Ministry of Health. And Juliana, the program manager, remains at her office desk close to Ariana. She's not directly threatened by the armed men, but has to endure the situation. She can to reassure Ariana and diffuse the situation by trying to call calmly to the armed robbers. Inda, the HR coordinator, she can flee the building through the emergency back door. She immediately goes to Diego, the fleet manager, who is in the neighboring compound servicing the vehicles. They decide to call the police, as well as Rob, the roving security advisor, who's currently in Erbil. Rob tries to understand the situation and give support from his location. So let us hear the thoughts and the concerns they have following the incident a couple of days later. What physical mental well-being concerns may this team have? So Namazik, the country director.
I feel really bad about what happened in the office, and especially to Ariana. I was aware about the threats in Tiflis. I had addressed the security risks to headquarters and suggested to install stronger gates and employ an additional watchman. But I was told that because we didn't consider the cost in our annual budget, no money could be made available.
Next. So Ariana, what might she be thinking or concerns have?
This was the worst experience I've gone through. I'd known this could happen to me. I would never have accepted this deployment. I was told about the company employee assistance program, but I really don't know what this is about. I could have been raped or killed. I don't feel safe anymore in closed spaces. I'm seriously considering suing my employer.
What about Juliana?
The armed robbers targeted Ariana. They must have known she was the finance manager. I was terrified. Just 2 months ago, I really had to fight to go on a personal security course where we were put through a simulation similar to what we experienced. I'm so glad I did this course. It really helped me to stay calm.
What about Inda, the HR coordinator?
I feel lucky that I was able to flee the office. All I could think of was that those men might assault me. Fortunately, Diego had the number of the local police, and I was able to reach out to our security advisor. Our organisation offers psychosocial support. I will strongly recommend to Namazi that we provide mandatory group sessions for all staff and individual sessions on a voluntary basis. I don't know if it will be approved because I know that Namazi is worried about the budget since we didn't get the security upgrade approved.
What about Diego, the fleet manager?
Wow, this really brought back memories. I had to endure a vehicle ambush when I got shot 2 years ago. I was diagnosed with a PTSD after that. But I never told anyone about this in my team. I know they expect me to be strong and supporting everybody. I don't want to let them down though. I don't know what to do now. I can't sleep and I'm hardly able to work anymore. This sucks.
What about Rob, the roving security advisor?
In my last risk assessment, I recommended to HQ to install physical security measures and provide security training to all staff based in Tiflis. I really don't understand why this recommendation was ignored. I know from previous experience that people will be mentally affected and stressed by this armed robbery. I have been trying to explain to my organization the link between good physical security and mental well-being. I just hope this incident will bring some change.
Okay. So now we've listened into the physical and mental well-being concerns of the Georgia country team following this incident. But what if this would happen to us? So for the next part on self-reflection, I have the pleasure to hand over to Steve Dennis. Dennis, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Philip and Lisa before. With this, yes, I think we can all associate with incidents similar to this. This isn't too abstract to the settings that we work in. So with that, let's go to the next question on Mentimeter. And Megan, next slide, please. Oops. So there's the code, the poll code, in case anyone is just joining. And we will be responding to these on a scale of 1 to 5, least most. I think there's a larger number being the most. So let's go ahead to the questions there, Megan. One more slide. Okay, how well equipped do you think you will be of this event from the case study on yourself? Please go ahead and rate this, how well equipped you would be. And then secondly, I'll give you a second. How well equipped do you think your colleagues would be to minimize the impact of this event on themselves? Go ahead and get those two done on Mentimeter now. Okay. With that, there are some other questions, but we'd like to see what's coming up now. So Megan, next slide. Okay, I don't see the results for number 1. Megan, is it possible just to recheck the link on question 1 just to make sure we can bring up those results?
Yeah, I'm just refreshing now.
Okay. All right. We're not going to be discussing these, but it's a self-reflection. And I think from this, the center of gravity of that second one being lower, it does bring up some ideas, I'm sure, with everybody about how well their colleagues. Okay, well, that's good. I guess some proactiveness of the group that we've got, the center of gravity more in the middle of that first one. And then we got to look out for our colleagues. Okay, moving on to question 3, and next slide, Megan. Question 3, we can see in the Mentimeter, do people in your organization receive inductions, trainings appropriate to the management and response to risks they may have experienced in their deployment? Yeah. So please go ahead and rate that. 1 being a low amount of these, and 5 being a very high amount. Okay. And then question 4. Okay. When you have a chance, Megan, go ahead to the next slide, but we'll keep going here. So question 4, does your organization have reasonable measures in place to support physical and mental health injuries from such an incident? Okay, again, a low amount being 1 and 5 being a higher amount. Okay. Now we're also going to group in question 5 to the results and the reflection. How actively is psychosocial support offered to you or in your organization as a post-incident response to something like this incident? Okay. Again, 1 being low, maybe it's not offered, maybe it's only offered to high-profile situations, and this may or may not fit into that. And 5 being there's quite a proactive amount. So go ahead and submit that. Okay, I see that Megan is maybe rebooting the presentation with those links. So we will hold off a bit of reflection and move on. But I'm glad that we are getting large numbers on this. Okay, so we'll reflect on those 3 questions in a minute. Let's go ahead to question 6. If this happened to you, how likely would you reach out for psychosocial support? You know, I guess there's several characters here, but still this could touch you directly or vicariously. So just imagine yourself in some of those situations. Okay, then question 7, a similar one, but how likely do you think your colleagues would reach out for psychosocial support? And again, kind of take an average situation there. Okay, we will be looking at question 6 and 7 on the reflection once it's up. Okay. Now I see, Megan, you've got the Mentimeter back up. Can we go back a slide to the reflection on questions 3, 4, and 5? Okay, those are individual. Okay, looking at that, yeah, so we're going to do this. Okay. Okay, I see these are shared directly with Menti. Okay. People in the organization receiving inductions training appropriate to the management and response to risks they experience. Okay, the center of gravity is very much in the middle there. I don't see anybody that has said it's very high, and a concerning person that indicated it was the lowest. I think that's the takeaway here. Moving on to question 4. Thank you. Reasonable measures to support people. Okay, there are some good examples, and I think something that we have to find more platforms to do is highlight those high levels of good measures in place. Okay, and for the lower ones, yeah, escalate that. Okay, onward to 5. Question 5. Okay. Good. The center of gravity that is quite positive. That's good to see that it's offered. I do want to reflect that sometimes offering something that someone might not appreciate the value of might not be good enough, but meaningful offerings, that might be the way forward. On to number 6. Okay, if this happened to you, I think this reflects with the center of gravity larger that we have a mindful group. Yeah, good. Let's go to number 7. Okay, and then for the colleagues reaching out, yeah, less positive there. I think this is a good indicator that maybe we have to share some of that mindfulness with our colleagues and support them through that. Okay, moving on to question 8. Let's talk about this, about how different would your organization have reacted if the affected staff had been national rather than international? Okay. So 1 being no differently and 5 meaning very differently. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh, good. I think if some of us reflected maybe 10 years ago, asking the same question, possibly this would be different. I think this is good to have our mirror showed up to us. Okay. Let's move on to question 9. Here's just a couple of enter a word, a couple of words, and we'll look at these a little bit later. But what improvement would you like to see to achieve better physical and mental well-being? Okay. Good. Okay, we're starting to see a bit of a word cloud, but maybe Emily or Megan, whoever's got that, can pop that. Or I guess, sorry, we're doing that one later. We're going to show this. Well, we'll let people finish populating this, and we'll take it up later. I believe now I am handing back to Liza.
In fact, I think it's Philipp.
Oh, sorry, Philipp. Sorry, Philipp. There. Yeah, got it.
Thanks.
Philipp,
No
go
worries.
ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Now, I have the pleasure to welcome back Liza, Reilly, Director of GISF. And Steve, you will be with us in this panel discussion as well. Steve Dennis, the founder of the Steve Dennis Consulting, and Dr. Liza Jachens. So Liza, my first question was to you. Liza, as a researcher and professor at Webster University in Geneva, from your perspective, what are the challenges and opportunities having an integrated approach with measures to ensure physical and mental well-being of aid workers?
Thanks, Philipp. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, big question. I see an integrated approach as kind of encompassing 3 main areas of activity. So I think the first one would be around protecting mental and physical health. So looking at reducing all of those risk factors in the work environment and any other factors that are linked to mental health outcomes. I think the opportunity here specifically would be that it encourages employees to fulfill their responsibility to provide a safe and healthy work environment. So things like the psychosocial risk assessments and being able to identify those things that can be reduced. This is positive because it's a proactive approach, it's a preventative approach. I think it's also quite helpful because it shifts the lens from the individual to the organization, so they have to take some of that responsibility too. So all of those are kind of opportunities in that specific area of protecting mental and physical health. The other area is promoting mental and physical health, which is another aspect if you're looking at an integrated approach. Opportunities here would be about employees developing resources at work. So, training, which just came up in that little example that we did earlier there, a sense of community, fairness, justice, communication, all those types of resources. Also, having individuals take some responsibility as well for their own health and developing their own strengths. Creating meaning in their work, supporting others, contributing, having a voice in mental health. So those are all opportunities as well. And then the last aspect of maybe an integrated approach would be responding to health problems as they manifest. So that would be the interventions or treatments. I think the challenge here really is meeting the needs of an individual in a coordinated way. So ideally, we want medical, social, and psychological needs to be addressed together. And I think that's quite a difficult thing to do because it involves a lot of collaboration and communication across different groups and different professionals. And it's quite hard to shift from that medical model to maybe more of a biopsychosocial model. So I think there are quite a few challenges in that. I think also just reflecting that integrative approach would actually mean that we need to have multiple components to addressing health. And anything that has multiple components naturally becomes quite complex. It's quite difficult to manage. But the benefit is that when you tackle one problem from lots of angles, you can have synergy happening. And so different bits will be mutually reinforcing each other. So if you're preventing and you're promoting, that is better than just doing one or the other individually. It has a bigger impact, sort of like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts type of feeling. I think that's about it really. So those three main aspects, which provide some opportunities for organizations and individuals. But then again, the challenge is really about the complexity of it and addressing everything in a biopsychosocial model as opposed to a medical model.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Liza. Steve, with your years experience working at the field level, what fears or concerns could this implicate as opposed to opportunities towards a good investment?
Yeah, thank you, Philip. I believe that the largest fears and concerns with considering physical and mental health well-being is that it's perceived as being expensive in time and financial resources, and it may be considered as a soft or catering to the weak. I believe there are too many analogies out there on the return of investment for good establishment of well-being and the maintenance of well-being. You could take it as crassly as vehicle maintenance. You maintain the brakes, you have less accidents. You keep your sailors full of vitamin C, less scurvy. If you can build well-being at the culture of well-being, and you maintain that, and should people get injured, if you can reestablish that well-being, I think that you have a very good return on investment. And I mean this from when people don't have that well-being, injuries are worse. The cloud of frustration and the distractions that come up from a lack of well-being, it blocks the recovery, and it's distracting for the colleagues who are involved on the side of that, a distraction for there as well. So I think the fears and concerns are that it's not as profitable as a return of investment, and it's more of a thing you do if you're a soft organization. I think there's too many gold examples of taking care of staff well-being and being highly effective, and we have to emphasize those. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Lisa, what does this mean then from an organizational and a policy level, and how does this impact the organizational culture and time to implement policies?
Thank you, Philip. At a policy level, I think one of the problems we constantly run into is the siloing that tends to happen within the humanitarian sector. And we'll see that security is managed by one part of the organization, mental well-being another. It may or may not fall under human resources, it might fall under something else. So you have quite a disjointed perspective. And how does that transition down into field level, and who is promoting these different components. And if you don't have them joined up at headquarters and at policy level, they're certainly not going to be joined up by the time it gets to the field. And this can really be an issue when you have, if you consider at headquarters, you have lots of people with specialist areas, as Liza was saying. But at the field office, a few people often have to wear many different hats. So if it's not clear on who is supporting who and how do these components fit together, it can be very easy to lose part of it, or somebody will pick it up will see a gap and pick it up without really understanding what is that organisational approach that they should be taking. And I think then this sort of filters down through to the organisational culture. If you don't have something where physical and mental well-being and safety is seen as a priority and an integrated priority, they're not going to be seen as a priority at field level. And we continue to see that, as Steve was talking, looking after mental health is for the weak. We become weak when we're not looked after. I mean, this is a vicious cycle, and where the culture of organizations and the sector as a whole continues to be accepting psychosocial support is a sign of weakness. And you see that organizations have policies which say you will take R&R every 6 weeks, or there is an employee assistance program available for international staff, or things like this. But if they're not encouraged, if people are not actively encouraged to take these up, I can certainly speak from my own experience where, one person says, oh, we're really busy, I won't take R&R. So the next person says, oh, well, I won't take R&R either, even though they really need it, because that culture is there. And I think if we look at the way organizations are often structured and the drivers of humanitarian workers, which is one of wanting to help the populations in need, they will put themselves second. And we know from, in particular, the ICRC personal safety, personal security training videos, they always say, if you're not safe during a bombing raid, you're not available to help other people. And the same applies for our mental well-being. If we don't look after ourselves mentally, we're not going to be available to actually do what we want to do, which is implement the programs and support the populations that we're there for. And I think, again, just finally, a lot of what we put in place for mental well-being can be targeted at the international staff. Does it take into consideration what the needs are for national staff? The fact that they are in their home area, they may have local or different coping mechanisms. How do we also support that process? So we have a team that has cohesive coping strategies developed. And I think one final point, sorry, you did also mention resources, and I think that's been mentioned by Steve and Liza. This is always an excuse for not doing anything in our sector. We don't have the resources. But looking at the way policies are written to make sure they're integrated, that makes more use of our resources. Changing a culture to one where mental health can be spoken about without stigma. Again, that doesn't take resources. Yes, some resources would be great for training in mental health first aid, training managers to be more aware, really asking people, how are you doing today, and meaning it. Takes a little bit of resources, but is not, sometimes I think this is used as an excuse to not even look at tackling the issue.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, a lot of what you've mentioned, a lot of these aspects, they're circling around duty of care. So when we do talk about duty of care, what does that actually mean for physical and mental health within the security risk management?
Was that a question for me, Philip?
That was Lisa. Did I
Or
say
Lisa?
Liza?
Oh, and I don't know. I didn't hear. Sorry.
Sorry. About duty of care. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, the aspect of physical safety has been recognised in legal duty of care. And since Steve's case, there has been a lot of attention paid to that legal responsibility for duty of care. But often mental well-being isn't considered. And I think do organisations need to have a duty of caring? So it's not just about legal responsibilities, but it is around the culture of having a caring organisation and creating something where both aspects, the whole staff member, both the physical and mental, are really pulled together when we think about safety. And when we think about duty of care, we think about the whole rather than in parts.
Thank you, Lisa. So, Steve, here's a question for you. From your perspective, what do you think are good practices for implementing duty of care?
Yeah, I think the lens that I think everyone should use is putting reasonable measures in place for foreseeable risks. So on security risk management for the personnel, I think that structure is used quite well. And I think the same structure should go forward to staff's physical and mental well-being in terms of, yeah, I guess taking any type of risk, a burnout, PTSD, other mental health injuries or physical injury. How can we first get people aware of information of those risks, measures in place to reduce the probability, measures in place should those things be detected as well. Should an incident happen, how can we detect injuries and have the professionals assist in diagnosing it, put a treatment plan together, and start the implementation of that treatment plan to get back to a state of well-being. This measure, it's very similar to the security risk management structures that we use, but the focus being on the individual and their mental health well-being, I think is very much there. My focus of work is really post-incident, and that's where I believe it's missed. For example, if you have somebody that's injured in a complicated medical thing where pain management might be, it might be quite a complex landscape of concepts and different approaches that they would have to be managing. Now, let's say they are a program specialist in something other than medical pain management, and they're thrown into this type of real risk is that they're lost in the complicated terms and the complication of how to understand what it is to develop the to pursue that. So I think in the landscape, the foreseeable risk that they are being lost, get a case manager involved who is aware of that type of situation and has the expertise needed there. So yeah, for me, the most essential part of or the element of good practice would be the same type of structure. We're focused on that individual, and the for me, my bias is in risks and reasonable measures.
Thank you, Steve, for sharing this. Liza, what do you think duty of care is for mental health?
You know, I think duty of care is officially, it's about meeting standards. And I think all organizations have a, you know, they can think about what standards they want to meet. There's the basic, the minimum, where we just sort of complying to meet legal requirements. And then you've got the well-being standards where you might be doing a little bit more. And maybe you've got some burnout prevention and things like that. And then the ideal is really to have, the goal is to have thriving employees where well-being is more than the absence of ill health. And I think that's where the ideal should be. That's what we should be striving for. But for me, unofficially, if you call it that, my perception about duty of care is really about trust, and it's really about engagement. You know, are employees feeling that they can trust their organization to protect them, to care for them, to prepare them, you know, for their next role? Are leaders making psychological health and safety a priority? Are they communicating and engaging in that topic? Are employees do they have a voice in designing and managing their work? Do they feel valued and looked after? So for me, it really is all about those issues, those softer issues of trust and engagement. And are we meeting or even exceeding basic mental health needs? And I think basic mental health needs are super simple, but they're super powerful. So you can ask questions like, you know, are employees feeling respected and appreciated? Are they feeling safe physically and mentally? You know, are they having periods of relative calm and peace of mind? Are they feeling like they belong? Okay, a really important basic need, a sense of belonging. So there's lots of basic needs which could be really important for meeting for duty of care. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Liza. That's really a lot of food for thought. Thank you for sharing this. We can see if we have any further questions coming from the audience now. So there were some in the chat, but you're also welcome to express your questions per video chat if you like. Megan, perhaps you would like to read out one of the questions from the chat.
Yeah, so we had a question from Peter that was, do you think, according to the case study, that organizations do enough to help collaborators put their safety and security personally first?
I mean, we have Peter with us. Maybe we could ask him to expand that question a bit further. If you'd like to unmute yourself, Peter.
Hello, everyone. The question I ask is, do you think, according to the case study, that that organization do enough to help collaborators? Let me reformulate the question. So give me some time so I can write it again. And can I move with the second question? Okay, my second question is, working in a very insecure country where there's a lot of crimes and kidnapping happening on a daily basis, what do you think is the best security approach to develop for the organization and its collaborators, both at a physical and mental level?
Thank you, Peter. Who would like to take that question from Peter? Steve.
I can have a couple of comments here. Thank you, Peter. And also drawing a little bit onto your question one about this, about are they doing enough? Well, I think in the case study, it was very interesting. One of the people there, I believe it was Ariana, who was talking about was she was shocked this happened to her. And I think that I wouldn't mind Dr. Liza's comments on this, but that shock of a risk that is unanticipated could be actually quite worse than the thing happening. For instance, a pattern of armed robberies where people are not hurt if they freely give the assets over, and that is the general trend of things, then if she sees people in and is it wouldn't be such a whiplash of her thought process. Yeah, and it might remove the perception that her life is highly threatened. Now, what would you think is the best security culture approach? I definitely like the idea of informing people of the risks that they're being exposed to, the measures to reduce the probability, the measures to reduce the impact, such that I think that prepares them quite well should those instances happen. They can switch quicker from disbelief and then start acting and retaining some control of the situation, whether it's control of their breathing, of their thoughts, and responding more appropriately. And I think as such, they would be harmed less, and therefore recovery is less is needed, and they're quicker to get back to a well-being state. So those are just a couple of thoughts. I refer back to my panel, my colleague.
Anyone else, Lisa or Dr. Liza, would like to comment on the question from Peter?
Yeah, I really agree with what Steve was saying. And I think the other thing, and this relates to some of the other discussions we're having this week around sort of this person-centered approach to security, is also recognizing that everybody in the team will be slightly differently vulnerable to those threats. So trying to recognize exactly, you know, how are more people going to be impacted than others? So in the case of the case study, it was specifically finance. In others, it might be to do with your race, your ethnicity, your gender, your age. So giving people more information so they can make better individual decisions based on who they are and what might impact them, again, then leads to what Steve was saying about being better prepared, minimizing the impact of incidents, and better able to recover. So I think resilience is a term some people like, some people try and avoid. But I think that's important, and that's where we see really the link as well between the mental and the physical security, is that resilience to be able to continue and to minimize the impact of security incidents. Liza, do you want to add anything?
Well, I'm not really, I don't have a lot of experience on the security risk management side, but I was just thinking that local knowledge must be really, really important for this, and actually getting a lot of participation from that local knowledge and making people feel a little bit more empowered about how they can contribute and control situations that might, go not to plan. That was the only thing I can really kind of think of for this particular example.
Thank you, Liza. Do we have any other questions?
If I could springboard off of what Liza just brought up about local culture, is very important. And the question, how do you reflect differences in country cultures in a global well-being policy? I think that's a very valid one to a lot of agencies working globally. I think the spirit of a policy or the vision of a policy can be the overriding thing. It's the whole equity, equality discussion, support people in the ways that it is a best practice for them. If religious leaders, if community leaders are the better supports or better accepted supports than a psychologist or psychiatrist that might not know the person but is introduced post-incident, I think that's it. I would step it back to the spirit and the object of the policy and not the specifics. There, over.
Thank you, Steve.
I'd like to build on that, and I think this is where the prevention becomes so important, because if you are trying to think of a policy that can take into account all of the different cultures and the individuals when they're impacted by an incident, the more we can do to prevent and the more we can build up this sort of peer support approach, the better or the easier it is to deal with the different cultures and the different aspects of that. And I think we often see with mental well-being is that more effort is put in on the response rather than the prevention. And I think this is something the security managers here will recognize is that need to think about the prevention rather than the response. And I think one example that always comes to mind, and I know a couple of people in the audience may have heard me say this one before, we do need to be very aware of who we're working with. I worked in Mindanao in the Philippines, and there'd been an incident, a serious incident before I had arrived there with the previous manager. And we were organizing sort of a team building event, and people at headquarters, yes, you've got the resources to do this. Because of this serious incident, you might want to bring in an external facilitator to have a debriefing. We did a debriefing when it happened, but maybe we should discuss it again. So I brought this up with the team. I thought it was a great idea. And I was met by this sea of sort of very blank looking faces. And I sort of said, do you not want to do this? And they said, no, we've talked about it already. Can we just go to the beach for the day? I said, yeah, of course, why not? And that's what they wanted to do, was they wanted to have a celebration rather than to continue to talk about the incident that happened. So I think it is really important to give people the flexibility to be able to respond in accordance with what the team is looking for.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Lisa. So, was that a hand raised, Dr. Liza, or?
I can add if we've got time. I don't know how we're doing.
We're good.
All right. So no, I was just thinking from my research that I've done quite a few global surveys, and what we've noticed is that you definitely can create profiles of sort of high risk groups, and I think that's interesting and useful information. And so if we're talking about global wellbeing policies, that may be helpful, but actually when it comes to interventions, sometimes interventions have to be specific to geographical locations, or they might be specific to a younger age group, or they may be specific to specific job roles. And so I think there is value in also looking at interventions that may be tailored for a specific group who may be at risk. So I think that's important to acknowledge, that we can't necessarily just have, these big global interventions which may not cut across all sectors or all boundaries.
Okay, so you've mentioned that this can be a challenge, and what would the greatest challenges be when driving forward an integrated approach to security risk management with partner organizations, for example? Maybe back to you, Lisa, with that question.
Thank you, Philip. It is a really good question. I mean, this is something the research GISF did over the last couple of years around security risk management with partner organisations demonstrated a lack of open communication, I think, as a starting point between local partner organisations and their international colleagues. And quite a lot of misunderstanding within the international community, the INGOs, is sort of, but they're from here. They should know the security risks. And I wonder whether that same characteristic is also there when we think about mental well-being. But these are people who are in their home community. They have their normal coping mechanisms. It's not as if they've been taken out of their normal space. So I think there is often a feeling that local organisations, because they are in their home space, have coping mechanisms, and there's that lack of open and transparent conversation. But again, the same with security. There's a lack of open and transparent conversation within the international organisations a lot of the time. So if we're not properly engaging with these conversations within the international organisation, we're not going to be having those conversations with the national partner. And I think that's something, you know, we really need to just have more open communication and let them understand that we are open to listen, and that we can learn and see how we can support. And it will probably be also, we would learn a lot for our own staff and our own organisations. So I think there's an opportunity here for both of us to gain if we have these conversations.
Yeah, thank you. Here's a question, I'll just read it out from the chat. What about dealing with differences in risk in international and national staff in terms of very remote settings, and where local knowledge culture can bring with it complacency to security measures, but the risks are high for international staff, and then trying to implement the security measures, but then looking like you're calling out issues can create a cultural clash. So who would like to take that one? Steve, you're smiling.
Yeah, there's a few things there. Yeah, I think a strong recognition that typically national staff are in that context for a longer time. Likely the hypervigilance that somebody new to that context, or even them new to the changing context, if a war's breaking out or something, that would fatigue quicker than somebody brought in to that context. So definitely, I don't necessarily know that complacency would be the my word choice. Maybe it could be more of a calibration to the risks that are actually there. But it could be a complacency to, we haven't been injured by that risk yet, therefore we are immune to that risk. I guess that could be the complacency. I would say the way forward on this that I found most effective is getting all the way back to an agreement on how we are approaching risks. And that's for physical well-being, mental health well-being, assets program, reputation, whatever category there, agreeing that not that we can avoid all of them, but we can nudge each of them to better outcomes. So that would be the first agreement that has to be made. If you can, because there's such resistance to, well, things happen. Well, let's talk about not whether they could happen anyways, but can we nudge the probabilities lower? Can we nudge the impact lower? Can we nudge our awareness of mental health well-being, or can we make it it more resilient to shocks that come to it. So anyways, for me, it's firstly getting back to a base agreement on we're not avoiding 100% of the risks, but we are making things better. And then in which ways can we do that? So yeah, I do see that there are different cultures, the national and international, but you got to come from a common beginning point. That would be my point. I hope that answers the question, Suzanne, from my perspective.
I think I'd like to add a bit more around this in terms of, I think Liza mentioned it earlier about the importance of getting many different perspectives and different people involved in the discussion around, you know, what are the actual risks? What are the threats? How are we vulnerable to them? And I think one of the problems is the simplicity of the international versus national conversation. We know internationals come in all sorts of shapes, sizes and colours, but so do national staff. And I think there can be a tendency to sometimes assume they are all the same, all the national staff are the same. And are we taking into consideration perhaps different ethnicities, different affiliations, different ages, cultural structure? So again, I think the more perspectives we can get involved in the identification of the threats and the risks, the better able that the mitigation measures are to be followed and agreed on. And I think that remote location and sometimes can really be an issue when there isn't anybody keeping check on it. That whole remote management perspective, and how do you change that culture? I think that's one, it's a slow change process. But one of the things that we do see is what happens if there's an incident or somebody reports a concern, what happens to it? And I think this is often what happens in remote locations, is that they can identify things of concern, but nothing happens. And if they do that a couple of times and there's no response, they won't bother doing it again in the future. And what we often see is organisations are actually taking steps based on the information that they've been fed, but they don't bother to feed it back down the chain as well. So people don't realise that their concerns are actually being actioned. So it's thinking about, you know, what do we do with information that comes from those remote locations to make the people feel that they are being listened to and they are important to the organisation.
Thanks, Lisa. And this goes a bit also towards the question that came up earlier from Heather about how we reflect differences in country cultures when we have a global well-being policy. Right, so how can these global policies or standards be reflected in all those differences you might find in different countries, very remote locations? Pardon?
Just saying, go on, Steve. He looked as if he had something to add.
No, just my point from before. I made a quick reference to it, but embodying the vision of that policy or the spirit of it with a local context. So yeah, and definitely, yeah, here's the policy. Have your teams do the smell test. Like, hey, wow, this is great for somebody else, but we do things differently here. That's inappropriate. But what would be more appropriate? Yeah, here are the foreseeable risks to our staff. What would be reasonable measures that we put in place here? The global policy hopefully can be interpreted locally. That's what I would suggest. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Dr. Liza, you were mentioning earlier the importance of peer support and organizational culture. So maybe this integrating this could be a solution to having, on the one hand, global policies in place, but still being able to adjust them to the specific locations or cultures. So could you say or share anything maybe in what meaningful way we can integrate peer support and organizational culture into physical and mental well-being as part of our security risk management?
Well, I think peer support, in order to be able to support somebody, you have to feel safe about talking about mental health issues. So we need that culture to promote a caring culture, that people feel safe to speak up. Also, just that training to have the confidence to talk to people about mental health issues. I know with the mental health first aid, some of those courses that people can do, one of the big outcomes is actually a reduction of stigma, but it's also just about confidence and having that confidence that you can help somebody else, and you can recognize some of the symptoms in some of your peers. So I think so a little bit of training, but also that aspect of developing a culture of caring, and that people feel like they can speak up, which is really creating that safety culture. Yeah, and I think a lot of that culture does come from leadership positions and the ability to prioritize mental health in the organization.
Yeah, thank you, Liza, for that. Yeah, I believe there's several organizations, they integrate psychosocial first aid into their security trainings, which can probably strengthen the peer support measures within an organization, or the culture within the organization.
Absolutely.
And so we've talked quite a bit about preparedness and about prevention. What do we need to do when there's a trauma or a serious incident where, for example, we who might have done a psychosocial first aid training, which is way above our head. So what do we need to do when there's trauma and serious incidents? Maybe this goes to you as well, Liza, and anyone else who would like to answer that question.
Well, my immediate thought is that professional help for those affected would be really, really important. But since we're talking about an integrated approach as well, I think it's really important to think about the context before and after trauma too, because I don't believe the pathway from trauma to PTSD is a very simple one. So if somebody is exposed to a trauma, the environment at work, whether they're really well supported, is going to make a really big difference as to whether that trauma gets converted into a PTSD. So I always think that that's a really important thing, to look at the whole context and the whole person and what their resources are, what the demands are for them specifically. It's not just about sending them to help, to get counseling, to get therapy. That may be really important, but what might be equally important is drawing all the other resources from the environment. Are they getting management support? What are the demands that are happening in their role at work? Because if they're facing a lot of stresses, a lot of workplace stresses, a lot of daily struggles, then their recovery from something like that could be really difficult. At the same time, if somebody is they're feeling very vulnerable, their work has been very difficult, and then they are exposed to trauma, that's going to impact their resilience and how they interpret and recover from that trauma. So I think we do need to take all of those things into consideration. I think it can be quite complex when we're thinking about trauma in this context. I don't know, I'm sure Lisa and Steve have more to add.
Steve, you raised your hands. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I'd like to add on to this, because I think that's very good. Onto some of the practicalities of this. Somebody knocked off their feet from a serious incident. They might be the most brilliant program manager and being able to juggle 100 different details, but being knocked off, they may not be able to follow the vocabulary in insurance forms, or find the right experts, know the difference between a psychologist and psychiatrist, or general practitioner and orthopedic surgeon, and other types of specialists. They may need assistance to get through their recovery, plotting what their goals are and taking incremental steps towards those goals. So definitely some trusted and unbiased support to help them through that. Sometimes there's a proactive insurance companies or people assigned to them in the organization that are familiar with this and trained for this type of role. Sometimes they're not. I've worked with several cases where insurance companies know of the incident, they've heard enough documentation on it to know that, hey, they have to be involved, but the wrong form was filled out by a traumatized person who didn't understand the different forms. They didn't get a caseworker. Maybe there was a question, was there negligence or not, which is irrelevant to it was a workplace injury. The person has to be supported through it, but maybe that clouds the landscape, and these people are drifting a little bit further from a dedicated, clear plan to find out the severity of their injury, get a good treatment and recovery plan, to have the right team around them to move forward on that, and to take steps and get back to that well-being state. Yeah, so the professional psychotherapy, that's awesome, but too many people have blockages before they are able to get there, and so that's an essential step as well to get there. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So it's basically also often an accessibility issue, that in order to be able to get this kind of support, right? Like
Yeah,
filling
it's
out a
kind of
form,
like,
language barrier, maybe.
yeah, I think too many times, even if there's a well-resourced, well-intentioned organization saying, look, we're here if you need anything, it might be that person's first bad sexual assault or a critical car accident, or any number of traumatic experiences that aid workers go through. They might not know what they need. So telling people, let us know what you need. Well, it's like somebody recently diagnosed with cancer. Oh, let us know what you need. They might not be the expert on treatment options and how that fits into their situation. The same thing here. Over.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve.
Can I just
Lisa?
add to that? You said, Philip, what happens when somebody's sort of had mental first aid training but feels out of their depth? But I think a little bit of training in the aftermath of something can make a huge difference. And I think linked with what Liza was saying around the community and the team post an incident, it really brings to mind one person who I met. She had been staying, obviously working overseas. She'd woken up in the middle of the night to find a man in her room. She'd screamed and he'd run away. She went down in the morning, and her team, the response was, "You're so lucky. It could have been so much worse." And because of that, she felt that she could not sort of say, I'm scared, I was worried about this frightened me, because everyone around her was just saying, whoa, aren't you lucky? And that surfaced as a trauma, which stopped her actually doing her work 2 or 3 years later, because she'd buried it down. So being able to react appropriately to whatever size incident, really just want to reinforce what Liza was saying. It makes a huge difference on that path to recovery. And then with the practical steps that Steve was talking about.
If I can add on something, Lisa, I think the first thing I learned in my mental health first aid course was you are the first part. Support is the thing, professional support. So the encouragement of support. So hopefully somebody with a small amount of training, that's the one thing that they've learned. Then it goes on to number 2, just in your listening, you don't use the word at least, or the words at least. but that first one, out of depth, yes, it's physical first aid. You don't see a mangled limb and say, hold on, I've got a needle and thread, I've got this. You refer.
There's one question here, and I believe it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Dr. Liza, about what to do when there's trauma or serious incidents. So the question is, someone who has experienced this kind of serious incident, can they typically ask to be relocated to another location? I mean, either this can also go to you, Steve, or Lisa, this question, whoever feels most comfortable to answer it.
In terms of another location, I think it depends, unfortunately, on the type of contract. If it is a national staff member and that is their home place, a relocation is more difficult. Oh, sorry. Oh, excuse me, apologies for that. So yeah, I think it depends on the contract, but I think a near miss, which may create a mental well-being incident, should be considered the same way as a physical security. And if they're no longer able to work there because of that incident, that should really be considered.
Thank you, Lisa. There's another question here from Peter. Would you like to just read out the question? Is that okay?
No problem. The question I have is, as a security coordinator, how do you think I can support the staff that have been kidnapped recover from this nightmare? And how do I bring insurance to others to keep them focused on work and staying effective?
Steve, go ahead. I think that one you can answer.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I'm sorry that you're going through that. I think the first thing is to recognize what's the team going to be that will support this person, recognizing that there are several needs and likely no one person will have the expertise for those needs. So what types of support do they need? Psychotherapy likely would be part of it. They might not be ready for that type of thing, or might have a stigma that first needs to be explored a little bit, and the benefits of that discussed. If there are other things, the nightmare of the trauma, but the nightmare of the uncertainty of what their future brings, that's something. So definitely understanding the policies of the organization of how they could support them, that's important. That can give control back to the individual and comfort, and alleviate some of that fog of unknowns. I think it's really building that team. If they trust yourself in the organization, great. If they don't, maybe having an external person, and this does link up with the question with Aliv about external resources that could be supportive to this person. You might be the most trusting person, and definitely asking this type of question implies that you're concerned for your people, but there are fears from people that if they flag a lack of well-being, they might not be considered for an extension of contract, a different position or whatnot. So might have nothing to do with you, but they might need that confidential resource on the side to help them explore what they need, their options to get there, the team they need to get there, how to resource that path, and then to take steps to build their confidence and get there. Aliv, for what do you call such a person who can help? There's different titles that I've known about. A recovery coach, helping them identify their goals and explore that landscape to get there. A survivor advocate, this is somebody as well who can sometimes advocate for their needs. Definitely with aid workers, a lot of people have a hard time saying, I have needs, because they might be working in refugee camps or other dire situations where their needs are disproportionately lower than others, and they might feel afraid to say, my laser net, I have some needs there. So somebody to kind of speak on their behalf and push for them, and definitely keeping track of paperwork. I think the last thing somebody traumatized wants to do is engage in paperwork and emails and filing of stuff. So definitely a recovery coach or survivor advocate, somewhere in that role, they can be damn good on filing papers, because it does matter later down when insurance timelines are expiring, or even documenting the incident such that in a future time, maybe different organization managing it, and they need to have access to that information. This is just a part of it. I'd say it's a difficult thing, but yeah, get that team around you of the expertise, get them somehow empowered on what do they need, and articulating those needs and finding those resources in the organization forward. Yeah, good luck with that one.
All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Peter, for this question, and Steve for sharing your thoughts on that. We're coming to a close now, so we have a couple of minutes left before we end today's session. So I would like to hand over back to you, Liza, if that is okay, for the last part. And thank you very much to everyone in the panel for this very insightful discussion. Back to you, Liza.
Thank you, Philip. What I would like to do, if the production team is able, is could we have a quick look at the Mentimeter results for those last two word clouds, or for the word cloud from the beginning, the question we asked during the introduction. So what is most important for physical and mental well-being in security risk management? Awareness. Yeah, absolutely. Awareness and knowledge, they come up so much greater. I mean, even more than the duty of care, company's job, things like that. I think it is that the knowledge that is so important, more than policy. And I think just behind them is trust, which I know was the word Liza was using a lot. Active self-care, that's one I like. Know the specific setting. Promote a security culture. Yeah, some really good ideas in here. Honesty. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, can we have a look at the next one? What improvement would you like to see to achieve better physical and mental well-being? So nothing's come out here as a sort of the most popular, but some good ideas. Perpetrator demotivation. Yeah, make it less easy for the perpetrators. Better leadership. That's that other side of that. And a lot of the work that we've done around this really stems on the leadership, not necessarily management, but the leadership aspects of this. How well is the leader building the team, creating that sort of peer support mentality, that open communication. Here we've got better policies, the physical safety, again, we're seeing that link. Yeah, great, thank you very much. So that wraps it up. I hope you found this afternoon's discussion interesting. I do wish to thank Liza, Philip and Steve for joining us today, as well as all of you. We will just show a slide with some resources that are available. I have noticed there's been a question in the chat around crisis management and schools. that isn't something I'm aware of anything in particular. If anybody else is aware of any resources to do with this in schools, do please, if you can share with us, we can share it more broadly. We will perhaps have a look into this to see if we can find anything, but as I say, it's not something I'm aware of. If anybody else has got some ideas to help Maha, that would be great. Thank you very much. Here are some things where you might be able to find resources that are of assistance. And then finally, just to say, if we can have the last slide. As I say, this is the first of our events looking at integrating security risk management across humanitarian action. We have a number of other events coming up. Do please join us if you're anywhere near Geneva. It would be lovely to see you in person next week. But otherwise, do please join us online. And as we close, there will be a poll which will be launched. If your thoughts on that would be great, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
The people doing the world's most important work are up against the biggest challenges. Since the 90s, security incidents involving NGOs have increased as their independence and impartiality no longer protect them. Humanitarians are actively targeted, as well as exposed to the risks of conflict and disaster, facing kidnapping, injury, and death in order to help those in need. And the threats to their safety means their ability to help diminishes too. NGOs began to create roles for dedicated security professionals, but they often lacked support and resources and worked in isolation. In 2006, a group of them from the UK and Ireland got together to develop coherent approaches to security risk management in the humanitarian space, eventually becoming an established network, the European Interagency Security Forum. With a strategic, inclusive and collaborative focus, the forum has created a centre of excellence, facilitates a peer-to-peer network, builds capacity for security risk management, and provides a voice for practitioners, reaching over 100 members. In response to growing demand, it has now gone global, bringing different perspectives, expertise and resources to make core activities such as original research, trainings, workshops, and knowledge sharing more impactful than ever. As a result, organizations are able to build their security risk management on an even stronger foundation to keep more aid workers safe and enable sustainable access to communities in need. With a vision to see the work of the whole third sector done more effectively by supporting NGOs around the world, we are the Global Interagency Security Forum.